Hi guys, so last time we focused on figure painting and now we're going to focus on leather object painting. So I started with a simple background with a little bit of a gradient using a large brush and a low opacity, and then I dropped in a base color for the background table, at which point I just started to paint in some knots and wood grain and things like that. So what I'm going to do next is I have this reference photo of a belt here, and with that reference photo I'm going to use my color picker to pick some of the base colors, and at the outset I'm going to start with a darker base color as I paint the basic shape. So I'm going to start off by painting the basic shape at full opacity down here on a new layer. By just drawing from observation and I'm drawing it and painting it on another layer in its own layer so that I can modify it later. Because this is just like basically a rough sketch. I just want the basic contours and things like that, as you know. Just going to sketch out that base color, which is sort of like a purplish brown. And again, you can start this piece a different way. You don't have to do it this way. You can start by sketching it out and painting over the sketch and such. But this is just the way I'm approaching it this time. So I'm going to round off those edges. It doesn't have to look exactly like the belt you're using as reference, but it should look realistic, and you should get a lot out of this study and get what you put in. As long as you learn a little bit about texture and color matching and things like that, I think it's fine. So now we're going to start just sketching out some other lighter values and things. So I want to make a new layer for those lighter values. And we're adding a lot of layers, so I'm going to name this lighter values for now. I could always change it later. And I'm going to pick a color that's similar to what I see up there, which is sort of like a mid-tone, mostly saturated brown. And then I'm going to go over to my soft round pressure size brush. I'm going to add in all the textures at the end. And then I'm going to put a little bit of a sort of base coat of these light values. It's still pretty much the underpainting phase. But what I want to do is go back to layer 2 and use the magic wand tool to select the belt shape, then go back to the lighter values layer and start putting in some nice lighter values as needed. So I'm going to take that brush and just put in some lighter values there. And if it goes on a little too light, you could always turn the opacity down so you have more control or how much you're putting down there. I like to use a bigger brush. I don't have to worry about it being too big because I selected exactly where I want the paint to go. So a little lower opacity, and then we can start painting in those lighter values. So there's some over here. Let's put some in there. We don't want it to be too dark. but we don't want it to be too light either. So we got a little bit of a base coat there. It's looking okay, but it's a little too light, so I'm going to take it back a notch and go to my soft round brush so that I don't get too much variation. So let's put a coat of that over everything and then make some little low opacity highlights in certain places. So there's a little bit of it there. There's some highlight there. And then we got a little bit over here. We don't want it to go completely light because we're going to put in some texture later that's going to make it lighter. So now what I want to do is deselect the object, and then I'm going to go over to Lasso tool and draw in this little loop right here. So I'm going to draw that in. You could either do that, or you could use the polygonal lasso tool if you want to be a little more accurate. So let me zoom in really quickly and show you how that works. If you make a mistake, you hit backspace, and then once you see that little circle, click, and it completes the shape. So now I can go in there with my brush and color picker and start painting in at full opacity the, let's say, belt loop. So I'm going to type that in. I usually type everything in uppercase with a caps lock button pressed down so that I can see it easier on the screen and quit more quickly as I'm working. So I'm going to fill that in, and now that's filled in with a base color. And then I need a lighter value for the highlight on top. So I'm going to take that and then reduce the brush size down to about a 63. And then I'm going to zoom in a little bit and make some highlights there. So let's lower the opacity and make our highlight. And make sure it's pretty much the same color as what we're seeing up there. You might have to modify it a little bit because sometimes the color picker goes a little crazy and it doesn't do what you want. So I'm modifying that a little bit. There we go. So now there's a tiny bit of that color down at the bottom, but we don't need much more on this until we're ready for the stitching and until we're ready for other additions. You might want to put in a little bit of a lip there, in which case you'll go to your hard round, smaller brush, and then you'll grab a darker value. And you'll throw in a little bit of a darker value there, depending on how thick you want that different plane to be. I want it to be a little thicker, so I'm going to raise the opacity to almost full and then paint that in with the selection that I currently have up. So that looks pretty good. And then we're probably going to have to put in a shadow to the left of that, but we'll do that in a bit. So I'm going to deselect, and now we have just basically the base colors, some different plain shadows, and a couple little like mid-tone highlight values, or glare, if you will. So now what we're going to do is the same thing, same process, but the buckle this time. So I'm going to make a new layer and call it buckle. Then I'm going to use the same process to basically put that buckle in place. A little bit of a bevel there, straight edge, bevel, and then we're going to come around like this, making it look fairly smooth. Remember, these are their own layers, so we can smooth out those rough little angular lines. I'm going to come up there and then close it there. So then I'm going to color pick that, drop that in, and I'm going to start working on the other values and things by zooming in. So now I want to see, let's bring this up a little bit, the layer window. I want to see this a little lower, so I'm just going to grab it and pull it down. Oop. We'll deselect so that I can do that really quickly. There we go. So now I can zoom in and I still see my reference photo. So I'm just going to go back up the belt loop and select it again. Oops, sorry, not high enough. Back up the buckle. And then I'm going to work on these little values right here. I'm going to select my color picker. Usually when you're painting something that looks gold or that looks like something that's made out of gold, you see a lot of green, especially when someone's outside or even when some sort of object, golden object, is set on a table. So what I'm going to do is take that color and go to B, or brush, select the soft round, very small soft round, about 30 pixels for this 300 ppi piece, 8x5, and then I'm going to go in there and just roughly put in some of that value, and then go over it again so I can sort of finish it off at the end there with a little trail of a gradient or transition, feathered edge. And then what I can do is pick a little bit of a lighter value and put that in as well up at top, because you see there's a little bit of a lighter value up top. I'm going to make sure that it's not too soft, so let's switch brushes. Switching to a hard round. It's getting a little too faint there, so I'm going to zoom in a little more so I can see what I'm doing here. I'm just going to put in that little edge. So now you see if I deselect, it looks a lot more like the reference photo. And then what I want to do is a little bit of that on the latch right here. So I'm going to draw in that little latch with a polygonal lasso tool. Then I'm going to zoom in and do the same thing I did before. Now I can just select which color I need or value I need, whatever value I need, on my own painting here. So I'm going to select that and then go back, and I'm going to make sure that I paint in just a little bit of that dark with a soft round. a little bit of that dark, which is good. And then I'm going to take this value that I use for the highlight and paint that in with a hard round. Then I want a little bit of this. And paint that in there. Then I'm going to go back for the highlights and use a soft round pressure size for this little highlight over here of the same color and value. So let's deselect that and then select the entire buckle. Let's select this part too. There we go. So now by holding Shift and clicking, like I let go of Shift just now, I can keep everything where it's supposed to be. So go back to brush. I'm going to start painting in that little highlight on the side there. Now we can really make it look like it's sort of glowing. And the same thing here, by tapping, almost like stippling in that little value there. And then a little bit here to soften this highlight. And then a little bit on the end by tap, 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 tap technique, which is right here at the end of the little clasp. Then what you can do is you can go back in there and go to a hard round pressure size, go to a dark value, perhaps a dark brown, and then you can draw in that little shadow and the seam. Looks pretty good. So we're going to sharpen this off a little bit and put a little bit of that there for shadow. And a little bit on the bottom, as we see in the reference photo. So that looks pretty good for now. Now let's switch to the main shape of the belt. We could change a little bit of that later, like putting another plane here at the front of the buckle, but that's good enough for now. So now I'm going to put in these little stitch marks. But first, before I put in those final touches and details, I want to make sure I still have some overall shapes established. So let's see. We want to go back to layer 2, which is the belt shape. And then what I'm going to do is go to the lasso tool and make sure I select the front of the belt right here, the part that sort of curls around. Okay. So now I'm going to put that at the top and call it belt front. And then I'm going to fill it in with that lighter value. Oops. Got away from me there. So now I'm going to increase my size. I got the right color. I'm just going to put in a nice lighter value that I need. I'll get a little more saturated, but not too bright in value. That looks pretty good. So then I'm also going to select the rest of the belt so that the colors are consistent. Just put a little bit of that on the rest of the belt. I don't want it to be too strong, but I want the color to be harmonious. Alright, so that's a little better. So now with that selected, I can put some little textures in there. I'm probably not going to finish this one. I just want to show you how to do a little bit of the thread texture down here and a little bit of the like elephant skin texture, the leather skin texture, hide texture. So let's zoom in. And then we're going to just take a little bit of a lighter brush, a very small size, and we're going to start drawing in those little threading and stitching marks. Let's go all the way down to maybe like a 7 or a 5 with a hard round. And if you want a little more control, you can always go to the hard round pressure size. On a little bit of a lighter value, but not as saturated. So I'm going to go over there, the color window, and just make sure these are to scale. I'm going to start just throwing these down like little hyphens or dashes. And between those dashes later I'm going to put little stipples or circles in there. So I'm not going to do every single stitch, but I'll show you what I meant by the little circles. Zoom in. I'm going to get rid of these at the end here. I'll pick a color over here so it's more accurate. That's alright, we don't have to worry about that. So let's just grab a darker color in our brush, and we're just going to put in those little holes between these guys here. So basically just tap once, tap twice, tap 3 times, and keep tapping until it's dark enough. And you get the desired effect. Until it looks like that, basically. And what you're going to want to do for this texture here is either make a brush or purchase or find an elephant skin texture. So either an elephant skin texture brush, just maybe make a section of these using Define Brush preset, or find some sort of elephant texture and bring it in here, lower the opacity, and place it over the top of the leather. So that's about it. The belt is already about halfway done. All we have to do is finish all the little threading marks, throw in that texture, and modify some of the colors just a little bit, like the belt front, and then we're good.